Weddings have by default changed this year. The job of wedding vendors has changed, but it hasn't changed the fact that you still need your vendors, especially caterers. You have to eat. It's right. Like my favorite thing. Yeah. So today we're joined by Roots Catering Chef Craig Barbour to walk us through the wedding catering, what wedding catering looks like these days and in the times of smaller and virtual weddings. Chef Craig is the owner and executive chef of Roots Catering and Cafe, is a third-generation small business owner with an entrepreneurial spirit. In 2011, Craig started Roots out of his food truck and has quickly grown his business through catering weddings, social and corporate events, and his newest venture, Little Fête, a fresh take on catering alternative born from a pandemic. So why don't you tell us a little bit more about yourself, Craig, and Roots and Little Fête?
Sure. So I'm originally from Maryland. I grew up in a small town 30, 40 minutes west of Baltimore. And my grandfather and father both been running a machine shop in Rockville, Maryland for 60 years, I believe it is.
Wow.
So, and it's always been a one or two person operation. So I kind of learned how it works owning a small business, or grew up around it and really didn't know anything different. So it was just kind of natural that I started my own company. I remember having a conversation with my dad complaining about my boss one day, and he said, "You're going to keep calling me like this. You're not going to be happy until you open your own thing. So just do it now." And I was like, "Okay, all right. You said it, not me." So yeah, then I trained under Chef Mike Virgili at Carmel Country Club, and then trained under Bruce Moffett over at Barrington's for a little while. And then that's when I decided to open the food truck. So food truck started in 2011, a little 7x10 trailer. And our first day out, I think we did 300 people or so, simply because wow. we were at a food festival, or we had an Earth Day festival. So a local food-inspired food truck at an Earth Day festival was a huge hit. So that was really, really great. And then fast forward 3 or 4 years from that, we had 3 food trucks, and started to get a lot of catering requests and catering requests for weddings and things that are a little more high-end than what you would expect a food truck to be attending. And so we sold 2 of our food trucks. I still have the original one, just as kind of being used for storage, but it's still around. And that's when we started going full service, exclusively full service catering. And then 2017, we opened our cafe over in South End, which has been a really great kind of support marketing tool, and just a great local spot. We have a ton of regulars over there in South End. And then currently right now and during the pandemic, we are coming up with new business ideas such as Little Fête to just adapt to the marketplace.
So tell our listeners a little bit more about what Little Fête is, because it's such a great idea and your food is so delicious. Yeah. We love the South End spot that you were just mentioning. Before the pandemic, we went there quite frequently. Yeah. And have also, I think, eaten at the food truck and catered and all those things. So I can speak to how delicious your food is. So tell us a little bit about the venture into Little Fête.
Sure. So we were thinking we can't really provide service. We can't really provide bartenders or a bar, and we don't want to put our staff there for moral and liability purposes. So what can we still offer? And the last thing left was the food. So we came up with a plan and came up with a menu that would travel really well, and little to no preparation on the client's end for depending on the type of menu that they get. But it's basically catering in a box. You get a tray of all of your food prepped and ready to go before between 4 and 10 people. Obviously, we'll start to increase that number as restrictions start to lift and people are allowed to have more and more people inside. But yeah, it's meant to be something that you can open up. You can put on your own china if you want to, but you can leave it in the containers, open it up, and just start having a celebration. So you don't have to worry about doing any of that on your own, especially if you're having it for a small wedding or something like that. You have enough stress having to retool your entire day
Yes.
where you don't have to worry about cooking for everybody out of your home or your parents' home or the Airbnb that you rented or whatever it is.
Right. Yeah. So before, and I think I love the concept. I think it's amazing. And I think this is going to be something again that carries on even past once we get past this pandemic. Real quick, I think that one thing that got left out, because you say it all the time, you don't even think about it, so natural to you. But what in like 30 seconds? I already know the answer, but what is special about Roots? Like, what makes Roots? Like, as far as like your concept itself.
So originally Roots was all local food, as much as I could humanly do. And that was not actually sustainable, especially in the catering world. So now we use as much local product as we possibly can. And really what makes Roots is our adaptability and our customization process. You can honestly if you come to us with a suggestion or an ask, it's our job to cater to that. We will customize pretty much anything and try any idea that a client or planner has. So that's what makes Roots is our ability to be adaptable and ability to customize anything that our clients want.
Awesome.
Love it. All right, so talking about weddings now and catering, the looming question is, and you kind of have already answered this, but can you still have full service catering with such a small group?
So you can still have full service catering for a small group, and we actually do have some smaller events that we are providing a chef and maybe a server and a bartender for. And if it's a small group, you can still get all the service that it would require, especially if it's like an outdoor event for 11 to 15 people, and then you have a bartender, a couple of servers, and your chef on site. You still have a really, really great experience, and arguably an even better, more memorable experience than you may have had on that blink of an eye of your normal big day. But yes, you can still have full service. You just can't have it on the scale that you may have been imagining.
Fair. So for couples, who are having bigger weddings, right? Like restrictions are different everywhere.
North Carolina, South Carolina, the restrictions are different. That's just right over the border.
I know.
Yeah.
So crazy. So, what do you think is changing in the way of traditional wedding catering, kind of as things are, changing, restrictions are changing?
So I think that the restrictions right now are obviously forcing us to make changes to the weddings and events that we're having, but I think some of them are actually going to stick around long term. So obviously in North Carolina, the event size is restricted, and I think that people having to drop their guest count to 20 people or so is actually a little bit freeing for them and takes a little stress off their shoulders, because once you open the door, you guys know, and I know from planning my own wedding, is that once you open the door to a group of relatives or friends, that opens two more doors, and that opens two more doors, and before you know it, you have a 250 person guest count, and you really didn't need to. So I think that's a trend that is, like I said, forced on us right now, but I think we'll probably stick around for a little bit longer. I think weddings will tend to be smaller going forward for a while. And then for the other large weddings that we're having that are in South Carolina, where there's a lot less restrictions, how that looks different is with our service style. Essentially, we have served buffets, so there's no guests touching the plates or the utensils. We have served stations. We're even doing a boxed wedding this coming weekend. So every single station that they would have gotten normally is all going to be in a nice tied box. So
that's cool.
That's very
cool. So it's a lot of work on our end to do that on the front end of it, but in reality, it's less work on the actual day of execution. So the client saves a little bit of money and is still able to have the event, have the guest count that they want, but they just aren't able to have the service staff that they were initially counting on.
Yeah.
Right. Well, so
Yeah, I was going to say, so you're saying there is a way to have, I feel like a lot of people are transitioning to plated meals because they feel like that's a lot safer. So you're saying there's like different ways to still have stations and buffets.
Sure. Yeah.
You just have to be a little more creative.
When we were actually kind of mapping out how we were going to safely do weddings, because we knew that we had some coming up in South Carolina, and we knew that there were North Carolina venues that were still going to figure out how to have their events. We were proactive in figuring out how we could do that safely for our staff's health and for our clients' health. So we actually decided that plated was one of the least safe things for all staff in general, because if you're thinking about a server putting a plate down in front of you, that's pretty much the closest you're going to get to a stranger without actually like giving them a hug. And
yeah.
And so we didn't want our service staff coming in close contact with people who more than likely won't have masks on and placing food right in front of them. So what we have been doing is suggesting pre-plated salads or preset salads, which is perfectly fine, even if there's a preset salad and a preset first course or a little appetizer platter, so that people aren't up and around and taking past hors d'oeuvres or eating off of a grazing table or something like that. Then then we can move into some sort of buffet type of situation where there is the guests are coming through the buffet, and then our servers are on the other side making the plates for them, and their plate comes out at the end, or at an arm's reach for both the server and the guest. They're putting things onto their plate. So, and we have our stations designed in a way where there's no way that the guest can really get within 6 feet of our person behind the station anyways. And we have some plexiglass frames built and things like that we can put at bars when it's time for people to do that. So it's really just going to be a change in service. And my thought was it's less people touching the utensils and things like that than it is our staff coming in close contact with other guests during the event.
Okay.
I love that. I love the safety measures.
Yeah, I do too. I'm like blown away, and we've been very we're very much mask wearers. Not a hot topic that I guess, but we've gone out to a couple of restaurants, like eating outside and things like that. And I don't know. I feel for the servers, like what you just said. I mean, it's just like, man, you have to make a living at the same time that you're kind of out in the masses. I don't know. It's I'm impressed that you've kind of put all of this into place. So as far as like cocktail hour though, so cocktail hour is definitely one of the favorite parts of wedding. When we were doing a smaller wedding, is it still necessary? Is it something that couples should still do?
I think it's necessary, but I don't think that you have to really restrict yourself to the concept of cocktail hour. I think you can, depending on the size of your wedding, one is I hate past hors d'oeuvres at events that are small anyways, because it gets awkward for everybody really quick when you see this.
It really does.
It's the same.
I already had 4 of those tacos. Yeah. I'm good.
Yeah, you might as well the server might as well just stand in the crowd and join the conversation at that point, just holding the plate of food, because there's no point in going around and asking all 12 people if they want the same thing over and over again. So that being said, I'm not a fan of past hors d'oeuvres at small events anyways.
And the worst is if you don't like something and they just keep coming, it's like, oh, right. This is uncomfortable.
Yeah, no thanks. Can you give me a drink from the bar though? That would be great.
Exactly.
So yeah, you can still do the cocktail hours. We're also modifying the cocktail hours, really similar to how we're talking about the stations and buffets. But what we're doing is trying to get people to do some sort of grazing table type of situation. However, we're just modifying the way that guests are having access to the food and the way that we are actually plating and making the food. So let's say it's some sort of dip. There'll be individual dips out there for people to take. It's not going to be a single spoon and somebody spooning it out. Or let's say it's a charcuterie board or a fruit and cheese board. You can still have those, but there's not going to be any tongs out there and not going to be any like cheese knives out there. It's going to be picks, single-use picks, and hopefully everybody adheres to using that pick one time and throwing it away and then grabbing a new one. It's things like that, and just educating the guests on how to operate, and educating the planner and the mother of the bride and the bride on how you're gonna go ahead and make sure that their guests stay safe and they're gonna get what they want for those small events. So for the small ones, I think cocktail hour is you should definitely still do it, but maybe it's 30 minutes and it bleeds into dinner and it stays out the whole time. Or maybe it's something that is available when your guests arrive and it's there when the ceremony is over and you can continue on, something like that. So I think just kind of stepping outside of the box from the actual cocktail hour and just making it the socialization part of the event, but definitely keeping it.
So as things change, do you think, is it even safe to pass food at this point?
Right now, we are not doing any passed hors d'oeuvres. Like I said, our main goal is to reduce contact between our staff and our guests for both the guest safety and our staff safety. So I think there will be a time when it's perfectly fine to pass hors d'oeuvres where it won't be any different than somebody going out to eat at a restaurant anyways. But currently no passed hors d'oeuvres, and if somebody is looking for something passed, we did a wedding very, very early on in the pandemic where it was right when things shut down. The client pretty much had 24 hours to figure something out, and we had to help them figure something out. So we changed all of their past appetizers to things that are individually compartmentalized or on individual serviceware. So it's either on a pick or on a spoon or in some sort of vessel with a mini fork or something like that. So nobody's touching tongs and taking something off of a platter. And then the tough part was figuring out the cocktail napkin situation. So we put cocktail napkins in small stacks all over the event, and people could grab them as they pleased, but also servers weren't holding them the whole time, and you weren't having to take a cocktail napkin out of a stranger's hand.
Yeah.
So
a lot of things to think about when it comes to
stuff I've never thought of before. It's like we're all just going to come out of this huge germaphobes, I think.
Oh, for sure. I feel like for a long time it was like, don't let your kids, use too much Purell, and now we have a 2-year-old, so it's just like constant like hand sanitizer all the time. Like she's gonna have all the germs now.
It's crazy.
Yeah, I have a 1.5-year-old, and there's no way to take him into public and not have him contained.
No.
So
they're just like licking things.
Yeah, everything's going in their mouth. It doesn't matter.
Exactly.
100%.
Exactly. Well, one of the biggest questions that we always get is related to budget, right? I'm sure you get that all the time too. It's super common. So when we're looking at these smaller weddings, how does that affect pricing for the couples when you can't order in bulk? Typically you order in bulk, you get a better price. So how does that affect your couples, or are you keeping it about the same as it was before? So
for us, we're not charging any more than what we would normally charge for a regular event. What's actually happening is folks let's say they have a $10,000 budget for their wedding. All of a sudden, they can get a heck of a lot more for a lot less people for $5,000. So the budgets, the per person budget is actually expanding.
Wow.
But the overall budget is down because there's no way. I mean, there is a way, but they're not going to spend $10,000 on 11 people. I would love that. We could do some really great stuff.
That'd be amazing.
But yeah, so we are right now. What we are finding is anybody who's rescheduling. I think clients should use that to their advantage, and if they're thinking about rescheduling, or if they're thinking about still having their event, if they're thinking about having their event now, think about how much you can do with $5,000 for 20 people, as opposed to how far your dollar is going to go for 200 people.
I love that.
It's incredible the difference you can just have this over the top, beautiful wedding. I mean, I had one couple who downsized and they're having clear top tent, market lights, all these things that they weren't originally planning, and they can, really amping up the flowers and
for sure.
And their budget is a fraction of what it used to be,
Throw a videographer in there, like take all your wish to haves and make them must haves, and just keep the people from out of state from coming because you technically have to.
Exactly. So obviously here in North Carolina, while we're recording, this will air later. We're still at pretty small mass gathering limits. So one question that I get a lot is, does catering count towards the head count? And what are your thoughts on that?
I'm getting conflicting reports from both the health department and from the guidelines on that. So basically, I think it's been up to the venues and the client. We've had some venues who are taking into consideration and saying, okay, for an outdoor event for 25 people, we need to know how many people you're bringing because we need to let the client know how many people they are allowed to bring, and can you go down one less staff person in order to allow the client to bring one more person. Then we have some venues who are saying that they're not including catering staff in the overall guest count because technically they're kind of removed from the situation and they're not really in the group. So I agree with both depending on the venue. Some venues I think, it's too small of a space to not have the staff counted in the guest count, and some venues are so wide open that I think it makes total sense to kind of leave them out. They're kind of in their own bubble and not interacting with the guests. So as far as restaurants go, the staff in the restaurant is not supposed to be included in their 50% capacity guest count. So I think whichever way the venues decide to go or a client decides to go, I think the health department / state will be fine with either one. I think it's really just we've kind of been, the event industry has been really, really left out of the one thought process of the entire thing to any sort of regulations or guidance or anything like that. Because right now our guidance is 10 people inside, 25 people outside. So it's really low numbers without any sort of parameters in place to like not get around it, but adhere to a safer, larger model. So, but I think there's ways to do that, and I think that hopefully when we kind of move into phase 3 and things like that, if we can present some things as an industry to leaders and of how we're going to be operating, they'll let us have more people in a space at one time. And I know it's not going to jump to 300 people overnight, but I think there's a safe way eventually, not as of today, but I think there's a safe way to have 100 people outside by dividing them up and keeping the service staff 20 yards from where the event's happening, things like that. So there's definitely ways to do it. If restaurants can find ways to do it completely enclosed, and we can find ways to do it outdoors and in large spaces for sure.
Yeah. And I think this brings up a great point though of, for our listeners, Craig, you brought up so many great points about the safety that you're taking for both the guests and your staff. As you're talking to your caterer, make sure that you're asking these questions and finding out what they're doing to keep both, their staff and your guests and you safe. I think that is important, and it shows a lot about, kind of the company and things like that.
It does. I think that's really going to, when we come out of this, that's going to be one of those differentiating factors, is like how people treated this, and people are going to remember it. It's like brand, right? Like when you see, if assuming that you value those things, of course, but like certain restaurants are doing a lot more than others, and there's certain ones that I haven't seen how they've reacted to this. I won't go back to.
Yeah, so it's definitely interesting.
Yeah. The term I'm hearing people is from consumers is who's doing it well, who is doing well with the safety precautions. And,
100%.
I think that those do get circulated amongst folks as to which restaurants are doing well, and it's going to extend through to the catering industry also.
Oh, of course. So if couples are going virtual, how can they still incorporate a catering option?
So if couples are going virtual and they want to incorporate a catering option, then really Little Fête or some sort of delivered cater event is the way to go. I mean, if you're not going to, I would contact your caterer and I would ask them about drop-off options, because that's the way to get your food there. That's the way to get the food you already tasted from them. You know what's to be expected. And even if it is a situation where you're going to have to pop something in the oven for like 20 minutes or something like that, then I think that's way more worth it than trying to cook the meal all from your own. So contact your catering company and see what their options are for drop-off for your event, because you can make a drop-off almost as nice as what the full service would be. You can even ask your caterer to provide the full setup for you, with the chafers and the display and things like that, with little notes and instructions on things of where the food goes once it's ready. We've done that for quite a few clients, and then we provide them with large empty bins. They put everything in the bins, leave it on their doorstep, and then we come pick it up the next day, bring it back to our place, and sanitize everything.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think food's so important. And I think, especially right now, people are changing plans, and a lot of times, things like that get forgotten if they're doing something really small, just the two of them or whatever, but they're still going to want some kind of celebratory dinner. And there's, I love that idea of the drop off where it still feels really special and, intimate and a celebration, which it is. Absolutely. So I love that. I think that's awesome. So there's definitely benefits to small wedding catering. Can you share kind of like those 3 top benefits to having a small wedding and the catering options as kind of a takeaway for our listeners?
So I think the advantage of having small weddings is, one I already touched on, is that you can spend more money within your budget per person to get some nicer things. Like the things that were on your wish list can now be realities for you. The other advantage for small weddings is we get to pay a little bit more attention on our end from the service standpoint to everyone in the event. We actually get to we can build a stronger connection with 2 or 3 folks in the event rather than just our contact who was coming in for the tasting and sending us the check or paying the bill. And then the other advantage to it is the stress level and the level of expectations that you have on your shoulders is so much lower. You don't have the stress of having to get to 15 or 16 different tables of 10 and get to the bar line to talk to whoever else that you were missing, and they're getting pulled in 100 different directions. You can actually stop and enjoy the day rather than fly through it.
I love that.
Yeah, that's great. So thank you so much for joining us today. Can you let our listeners know where they can find you?
Sure. Yeah, you can find Roots Catering at roots-catering.com or at roots-catering on Instagram. And you can find the cafe at rootscafesouthend.com, and you can find Little Fête at little-fête.com.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank
Craig.
you. This is fantastic. Thanks for having me.